So this is a huge fight, one that just can't go under the radar. Enkidu versus Gilgamesh. It comes at us at a scale like no other. Two of the highest entities in the entire franchise just going all out and having a good time. If you aren't familiar with the timeline, this is the first time that they've met up since their passing, because remember, the time that this fight came out actually predates the events of Babylonia. It came out before that, and even if it didn't, the fight that took place in Babylonia, Gil was fighting against Kingu and not Enkidu, unless we're talking about the flashback. The flashback is the actual last time they were going head up, and then you have events like Fate Stay Night and Fate Extra to give us a little more information about that, when they were fighting against each other for 3 days and 3 nights straight. Immediately when the fight starts off, the moment that Enkidu is summoned, you see him use his presence detection skill. It's an A+ skill. It lets him find anything that's on Earth that's within a certain range of him. Even if you have something like presence concealment, unless the rank is higher than the rank that he has in this, he'll still be able to find you. So it's a very effective skill, and one that really just embodies him being a part of the Earth itself. He comes out and he finds that Gilgamesh is also there with him, and that's when he starts to sing his song. This song is described to make the Earth itself cry out. That's just how much range it has. That's just how much power it has. So he's all the way in the forest away from Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh is on the outskirts of Snowfield. And even being that far away, and the novel describes this to be around 6 miles, 10 kilometers, he still was able to find Gilgamesh, and he calls out to him the moment he does. And Gil is just ecstatic. This completely changed his thought process. If you were paying attention, he was about to use his potion of youth to turn into Kid Gil. That was about to be the path of Strange Fate. We were about to get that Kid Gil Hollow Ataraxia callback. And then he hears Enkidu and he's like, wait a minute, is that my brother? Is that my dog? Skip the potion, you can have that. I'm trying to link up. And it does go into certain sections of Enkidu's background that was completely skipped over in the pilot due to time reasons. You know, Enkidu at first was an actual monster, one that was sent to quell Gilgamesh, but when he first came, he didn't have the same rationale that he has now. He was an actual beast of nature, and he was treated as such, so he was more so forced into the outskirts of the land until he met the prostitute Shamhat, and she shows up in the manga as well, where she made him feel more comfortable with himself, and they banged it out in the woods for about a week straight. No, I'm not joking, this is what actually happened. And it came a point where he had respected Shamhat so much that in verse he took on her form. So the form that you see with Enkidu is actually him as Shamhat, and even in this form he's recognized to be a being that's made completely of clay. His assets are also made of clay, and one cool thing that it points out is that at least in verse he lost power to gain this reason. So Enkidu is really supposed to be stronger than what he is in his beast form, and he traded that off for being more human. And he's still stronger than most people, and he doesn't have an actual sex. I just call him a he because that's what I'm used to. Before they get off into it, you have Tine going over what she believed about Gilgamesh. She admits to the fact of not really knowing too much about him other than hearsay, and what she had heard about him wasn't all that great when you consider the background, the wars, but she was still willing to risk her life if it was actually gonna save her tribe. She was more afraid of the idea that these people would continue to overrun her land than Gilgamesh being the one to take her out himself. But she was about to witness everything that he was about. So now you have Gilgamesh in a position that's different to the one that he had in Fate Zero, where he was being held by Tokiomi. Considering that she's only a child and Tine is 12 years old, Gil feels like he has something to prove. So Gil is telling her just sit back and watch a true king at work. And the moment he does this, she talks about how he's enveloped in this divine aura, and then it starts to materialize as a dagger. It's kind of hard to see in the show at first, but the manga gives us a better angle of this, and she noticed how it was similar to the same key that had been used to summon him. But he had to correct her and say, this is nothing like the key that clown had. And it's described that he opened an actual portal in the texture of the world itself. And you can see this too. You see the texture of space starts to break as he brings it over to this side. The magnitude was just that powerful. Now this is a part that I really thought was represented well because it wasn't in the manga. And you can see how the key starts to take form as an actual conceptual weapon. By far, this is the best presentation of Aya that we've seen up until this time. Introduction wise at least, not the actual use. It looked better than it did when he pulled it out against Iskander in Phase Zero. It looked better than he did when he pulled it out in Stay Night Dean against Saber. Better than when he pulled it out in UB Dub against Shiro. And if you remember, just the sheer framework of this weapon was enough to make Shiro's mind overload. And the adaptation really exudes that because it's something that towers over the entire area. It really seems futuristic even though he's an older spirit. The dude is from around 2700 BC, yet he has this futuristic sword that nobody can comprehend but himself. That's something that we really got to get to the bottom of. And it's not just that weapon, but it's a couple of them. We got a lot of foundation for the framework of Excalibur as a sword now that we've seen Lost Belt 6 and, you know, us getting more involved with the fairies and fate. They were already a thing, but they were never so inclusive, except if you get into things like maybe case files. But for weapons like the gem sword of Zelrech and Aya, and especially the Slash Emperor that Otto Edom was using on the types, we need more background on these weapons, whether that be some type of side story, or maybe they find a way to implement a character that has interacted with these things before Gil and Zelrech got a hold of them, because it's just too fascinating to not know the origin of this weapon. There's even a line where he says, "Oh Aya, it may be unpleasant to wake you from your slumber, but I shall soon provide you with the feast." So he even talks of the weapon as if it's an actual person, personified. So in that moment, Gilgamesh just completely vanishes from her sight. So he flies out, Enkidu flies out, and they both meet up in the desert. This is a location that's to the south of the city. Perfect for them considering they were about to tear it up anyway. The speed that Gilgamesh was moving at when he took flight was indescribable. Tine tried to follow behind him with one of her familiars. It was her fastest magecraft and she still couldn't catch up with him. It also mentions that the reason that he can fly is because of one of his phantasms. Enkidu brings up the fact that he was floating due to the special power of his noble phantasm, meaning that it gives him this sort of supremacy over gravity itself, which is madness considering his fight with Saber and she was able to slash him when he could have just flown away, but clearly that doesn't count, right? Oh, I can hear the echo chamber now. She caught him by surprise, I guess. It also gets a little more into the fact that Aya might not even be a sword and he just uses it as one. Again, going back to Gilgamesh's age, this sword predates the development of swords. It's older than the planet itself, and this is more so something that you would see wielded by the actual gods before everything started to exist. It's anti-world level, and to clear that up, that doesn't mean that it can actually destroy the planet, but it has the power to destroy the world itself. And by world, we mean layers of the planet. It says this in both the novel, says this in the manga, if the Counterforce didn't have systems in place for that, of course. If you remember when he pulled it out against Iskander's reality marble is conceptually a world, and the moment Gilgamesh pulled it out, he just shattered the entire thing. All of his men started to cave into it. All it took was one blast, and it says that he got rid of his arrogance and put it all into one attack because again, he feels like Enkidu is worthy. He already knows how Enkidu is coming, so he immediately went for his strongest attack. That's just to start the fight up. That's just a fist bump. Crazy. And this is the point where they both get into their Enuma Elish, where you have Gil just straight up rupturing space with Aya, and you can visibly see this on the screen from the cracks in the texture to the tornadoes that's forming around them that's being created by the weapon itself. The very fact that he pulled out Aya against Iskander just shows how much respect that Gil had for him in the first place. And if you haven't been up on game with Extella, Iskander character is labeled a top servant in that timeline, believe it or not. Then you got Tine, who is still in the same location that he left her at, and her body is just being overloaded by magical energy just from being near it. And she had to do everything in her power to keep her focused and not make herself look weak in front of her tribe while he was using all of this power. Now you might be wondering why Tine could even serve Gilgamesh this amount of magical energy. It makes sense for Enkidu, right? Enkidu is part of the earth itself. So if he needs to draw energy, he can just draw it from the earth, and then the wolf will supply him with whatever he needs in that moment. But Tine is an actual human. This should be far too much from her. And this is something that she's went over. Tine's tribe, and again her name is Tine Chelt, her tribe was the one that was over these ley lines. And that's the reason why she has such high magical reserves, because she's getting it straight from the land. So I'm not gonna say that it's infinite, but she does have a lot to pull from. It's a lot like Sakura in Fate Stay Night. Sakura's was more on the infinite side, but she had so much energy that she could just keep dishing it out, and it wouldn't be a problem. It's the same reason why she was able to defeat the guy that summoned Gilgamesh, because when she did her spell, she didn't have to do an incantation because her energy is coming straight from the ley lines. So she casted her spell instantly, whereas the guy that summoned him isn't from there. So it took him too long to get his chant off, and he ended up dying because of it. It actually went into the fact that he also had an old fire spell that he was using, and if he had gotten it off, it would have swallowed her whole. But the convenience of her having these ley lines is just too much. Now she has mentioned that outside of the ley lines, outside the snowfield area, because that's the part where they resided over, that they're just commoners. Their power doesn't amount to much. But in the confines, she's got a lot to work with. And her magecraft itself is a specific type that shares energy with the earth. It doesn't outright say this, but you can tell from the way that she's portrayed in certain titles, like her being indigenous to those lands. It is America, that she's supposed to be Native American. And I really like that because it adds this element of friction where she's standing for going against these people that are overrunning the lands, just like it was in actual history. It's really the way that the FGO singularity in America was supposed to be. And if you think about people like Geronimo, they're real intact with spirituality. You had the settlers come over and they were gunning down everything. They were taking what they had, taking the lands, offer them treaties, and then go behind their back. You got the Removal Act, you got the Trail of Tears, working on camps. It was a savage time. And so you see Tine taking up this same mantle. Even in her profile that Orlando had, Orlando being Officer Reeve, you can see that she's wearing the Native American like garments in the show and in one of her flashbacks in the manga. So I really like the idea of Naruto pushing that narrative without actually saying it outright. And then you have Enkidu responding to Gilgamesh with the power that's described to be so intense that you would think it was Gaia itself, that being his own enema. And of course it goes into the fact how that was the embodiment of who Enkidu was, why he was given so much strength, and that the phantasm itself is him turning his own body into a conceptual weapon. Ridiculous. And you can see a lot of him forming this through the thunder and the lightning in the background, how he has so much control over the earth itself. It truly shows that he aligns with something that's divine. As a matter of fact, Faldeus brought up the fact that if he hadn't been summoned in the Lancer class, the guy that was trying to summon him may have brought out an actual god, because remember, that was his goal. But it does make a lot of sense considering Berserker is one of those classes that you can kind of do anything with. Well, let's be honest, everybody in Strange Fate is kind of doing what they want anyway, but there's still night classes, and so there's constrictions. But with Berserker, you get people like Jack the Ripper, entities like Humbaba later on, and even the way that Lancelot's summoning was manipulated in Fate Zero to make him stronger than what he was supposed to be. Same thing. It also references the Epic of Gilgamesh when Shamhat brought up the fact that it felt like the world had been born and destroyed 7 times when they were fighting each other. And you can kind of feel that in this very interaction. And it's incredible the way way that they modeled this in the manga, and especially in the show, you can see the light from Aya from space. You gotta think, normally when you see lights from space on a satellite level like the one that was shown, it's normally an entire country. It's a collection of lights peering up to one area, and the lights are high up because they're coming from the buildings. Gilgamesh, on the other hand, he was flying, but he was barely coming off the ground by comparison, and you can still see Aya. The light is that potent. They even gave us an additional angle where you see Earth eclipsing the moon, and the part where Gilgamesh is churning his Aya looks like a category 5 hurricane. Like, it's really wild how on point this was. So Gil and Enkidu have their back and forth, and Gil talks about how if his former self knew how he was in these timelines, he might have taken his own life. And he's referring to the rationale that he usually has when dealing with people like Tokiomi, for example. But now that he knows Enkidu is there with him, somebody that actually understood him, his thought process has completely changed. And it's a lot more sensible, like the one we get out of the extra timelines, or even Babylonia when he was still alive. This part is extremely important because we see Gil opens up one of the highest level of portals from his gate that he's ever used. In the aftermath for the fight, you had them recall that hundreds, and then they took it back and said no, thousands of weapons were being shot by the both of them. And then you have Enkidu match this with his phantasm, the Age of Babylon. And we see a picture of this in the manga where he pulls up clay armaments from the earth because that's his domain, and he shoots it just like the Gate of Babylon. The thing about it is that if you've seen the fight between Gil and Enkidu in his flashback in Fate Extra, Gil details how the whole reason that he shoots the Gate of Babylon in the manner that he does was to match this very phantasm. He had to do it in order to keep up. So when you think about it that way, doesn't that ironically make Gil a faker too? Because he was just copying Enkidu. It's just such an ironic scene considering his relationship with Archer. Hilarious. And then you have Enkidu realizing that a natural enemy is present, of course this being Pale Rider. They do their final clash, and everybody in the war starts panicking just off of feeling both of their powers clash. You got dudes way at the clock tower who have been watching everything that's going on so far saying, we're not getting involved in that. Do you see the crater that they just made? Y'all got it. So even the Mages Association and the Holy Church, who were both just sitting back and just gonna watch how things played out, seeing this level of power right from the start, they had to get involved. And that's another scene that was completely cut out of the special.